Just this year, North America has had over 6,000 reported UFO sightings. Every year, the number of sightings increases. Maybe that's because aliens are slowly making themselves more known to us. Today, we will be looking at some of the most famous extraterrestrial encounters reported by the military. From alien abductions to aliens killing soldiers. Let's talk about this and more only in today's video. Starting off this countdown, we have the disappearing Air Force jet. Over the years, a number of military officials have disappeared while exploring UFOs. Take this case, for example. On November 23, 1953, the U.S. Air Defense Command noticed a blip on their radar in a restricted airspace over Lake Superior. Since it was in restricted space, an Air Force jet took off to investigate. There were 2 crew members on board. The men never returned home from the mission. So while out investigating the blip, they got right to the spot where it should be. On the radar, it showed that they were right on top of this blip, but they couldn't see a craft anywhere. Then ground control saw the blip veer off and vanish, as did the men inside of the jet. The United States Air Force, US Coast Guard, and Canadian Air Forces all conducted an extensive search and rescue to try and find the men, but this was sadly unsuccessful. In fact, they didn't even find signs of wreckage. To this day, no one knows what happened to the mysterious UFO, the men, or their jet. Moving on at number 9, we have the Tehran UFO. In the early hours on September 19, 1976, a shiny object was reported hovering in the skies above Tehran by at least 4 different people. As a result, 2 Imperial Iranian Air Force F-4 Phantom II jets set off to explore this mystery object. However, while nearing this object, their craft began to fail. They were going to open fire on it, but their weapons system was down. Not only that, but officers described the light as, and I quote, flashing with intense red, green, orange, and blue lights, so bright that I was not able to see its body. What's weird is that as soon as their jets moved away from the craft, their systems returned to normal. He then watched the craft, and I quote, slow down and land gently on the ground, radiating a high, bright light. The next day, they explored the area where the craft landed, and a number of residents said that they heard a loud noise and a bright flash of light during the night. In our 8th spot, we have the 6 soldiers. This next UFO encounter took place in North Korea in 1951 during the Korean War and impacted a number of Korean soldiers. So in May of 1951, Korean soldiers were preparing to bomb a nearby village when they were greeted by a strange craft. According to the men, the craft emitted some form of a ray that made their airburst start to explode. One man then said that they were attacked by some ray that was emitting pulses. Like a lighthouse light, you could see when it was aimed directly at you and when it wasn't. Well, after this weird attack, the men were left sick and had to be taken to the hospital. Some say that they were attacked by a UFO. Others say that they were attacked by some sort of death ray. To this day, we still don't know what attacked them and what caused them to fall so ill. Moving on at number 7, we have Skinwalker Ranch. Now this place has been known to be filled with supernatural activity. Not only do evil shape-shifting entities roam the land, but apparently aliens and UFOs do too. According to the original owner, Terry Sherman, him and his wife had a number of chilling experiences there. This ultimately led to them selling his plot of land. For starters, in June of 1996, mysterious crop circles kept appearing. Then, on a number of occasions, they saw UFOs hovering around their property. The worst is when they kept finding their cattle completely mutilated. This was not done by an animal, as it was done without bloodshed, and the cuts were very precise. For years, the government and military have been exploring Skinwalker Ranch to try and make sense of this situation. But they haven't, honestly. In our 6th spot, we have Falcon Lake. This incident has been named one of the most famous Canadian UFO encounters. It all started on May 20th, 1967, when 2 glowing objects descended from the sky near Falcon Lake in Manitoba. This was witnessed by a man named Stefan Michalak. Apparently, one of the weird crafts landed close to him, so he decided to investigate, like a dummy, which was a terrible idea. When he got close to it, it suddenly shot back into the sky. The beam of light from the craft as it took off set Stefan's clothes on fire. He was left with a bunch of strange burns on his body, including burn marks on his chest and a pattern of dots. Following the encounter, he fell ill. Now, some people believe the story to be a hoax, but he literally has burn marks on his body and scorched clothes as proof. So it makes you think otherwise. You're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the two fishermen. On October 11th, 1973, two friends, Calvin Parker and Charles Hickson, decided to go out fishing on a river in Mississippi. That's when a big bright light came out of nowhere. Parker reported, and I quote, "It was a blinding light. It was hard to tell with the light so bright, but it looked like it was shaped like a football. I would say, just estimating, that it was about 80 foot. It made very little sound, and it was just a hissing noise." But it gets weirder. He then claims that three legless creatures came out of the vessel and towards the two. They described them as having mitten-shaped claws. One was necklace and gray, the other was more feminine. The friends started to freak out, and that's when these creatures wrapped their hands around their neck. Upon doing so, they calmed down. Parker thinks that they were injected with something, and that's why they immediately calmed down. After that, he claims that they went on board the vessel and were experimented on. When they got out of there, they alerted the police, who alerted the military. In fact, the two men were interrogated a number of times because of how wild their story was. Moving on to number 4, we have the mutilated sergeant. This story is one that genuinely freaks me out. So back in 1956, an American Air Force Sergeant, Jonathan P. Leavitt, and Major William Cunningham were out collecting the debris from a recent missile launch in New Mexico. While doing so, the two separated and decided to go their own ways. After a while, Major William heard his sergeant let out a loud scream. As he rushed towards him, he saw the sergeant being lifted up by a UFO, then pulled him inside the craft before zooming away. When his colleagues found William, he was in complete shock from what he had saw, and he was taken to the hospital. Of course, no one believed him. They were like, there's no way that he was abducted by a UFO, okay. But after researching, they did find that an unidentified object was present on their radar at the time of the abduction. Now, what happened to the abducted man? Well, 3 days later, his body was found 10 miles away. It was severely mutilated and drained of blood. Isn't that freaky? So it seems like he was literally abducted by aliens and then they killed and ate him or something. What makes this even more suspicious is that the government reports on this just suddenly vanished into thin air. Moving on to number 3, we have pilot Frederick Valentich. On October 21st, 1978, Australian pilot Frederick Valentich was partaking in a 125 nautical mile training flight when he disappeared into thin air. Now, it's important to note that Frederick was a very experienced pilot. So around 7:06 p.m. that night, he radioed his crew saying that an unidentified craft was following him. He described it as having 4 bright lights with a shiny metallic exterior. His final words were, "It is hovering and it's not an aircraft." Then his signal cut out. Frederick or his craft were never seen again. Now, many people believe that he was shot down or abducted by a UFO. In fact, an unidentified farmer in the area said that he saw a UFO nearly 90 feet in length hovering above his farm. He saw this during the morning of Frederick's disappearance. He then said that he also saw a plane stuck to the UFO leaking oil. Moving on to number 2, we have Terrel Copeland. In 2007, former United States Marine Terrel Copeland had his first experience with an alien. He was in his apartment when he saw an orb of light outside. He said, and I quote, "It was just a big ball of light. It wasn't moving. One was solid white. The other was directly across the street from it, up 300 feet above ground, and was changing colors very rapidly." The next thing he remembers is feeling as though something was wrong, and he passed out. When he woke up, he heard someone entering his apartment. The person was moving the doorknob and scratching at the door trying to get in. He tried getting up from his bed, but he was completely paralyzed. He tried to reach for a weapon that he had, but that's when he heard a voice through the door tell him, "You don't need that weapon. We won't harm." When he finally was able to move, he lost 4 hours of his time. He believes that he was abducted by aliens. He said that he remembers being in a room with a woman who was definitely not human. He said, and I quote, "She had the typical black eyes you hear about. She had an elongated skull, and that startled me. And the next memory I have is me standing on my balcony waving at this cylinder-shaped ship." That's freaky. Do any of you guys have a good alien abduction story? Let me know in the comments below. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the Boy Scouts. On August 19th, 1952, a scoutmaster and his Boy Scouts were on their way home from a retreat when they encountered a bright flash near West Palm Beach, Florida. The scout's master originally thought it was a downed plane or a car accident, so he pulled over and got out to help. He told the scouts to stay in the car and alert someone if he didn't return in 15 minutes. So he got out with his flashlight and an axe and went towards where he saw the bright lights. This ended up taking him to a wooded area. About 4 minutes in, he started to smell something very nauseating. Then he felt like he was being watched by somebody. The next thing he remembers is feeling heat on the top of his body. He looked up and saw a hovering, glowing object above him. He started to back away from the craft when he heard a noise like metal against metal. A hatch then opened and he saw a red flare come out towards him. The next thing he knew, he was unconscious. When he awoke, he was leaning against a tree but was completely blind. His eyes had been burned by the light. When authorities found him, he was incoherent, terrified, and freaking out. Stories like this trip me out because, like, if it wasn't an alien or a UFO, then what was it, you know? Alright guys, that's all for today's video. Let me know in the comments below, do you believe in aliens? How about after this list, do you believe in them now? And with that being said, smash that like button and subscribe to Most Amazing Top 10 for more amazing videos. I've been your host, Lindsay Ivan, and I'll see you when I see ya. Bye. Oh my god. Not when I'm doing scary stories. God, did you hear that? A neighbor banged my door. Fuck. Oh.